A History of Southern Missouri and Northern Arkansas by William Monks, published in 1907. Makes his escape. The author was determined to make his escape whenever the opportunity offered, and he could learn all about the whereabouts of the Federal soldiers from the excited Confederate scouts, who would ride along the lines and say that the lop-eared Dutch were as thick as rats at Springfield, Missouri, moving around in every direction, and they might be attacked at any time. And General McBride was looking every day to be attacked by the Federal forces to cut off his forming a junction with Generals Price and McCulloch. In about 4 or 5 days, they reached Berryville, near where the Eureka Springs are, and went into camp just west of Berryville, right at the spurs of the Boston Mountain. The prisoners were placed in the guardhouse near a little creek that was then dry. Captain Forsey's company went into camp next to the company commanded by Captain Galloway of Howell County. As the weather was very hot and dry, and the author had been marched barefooted, one of his shoes having worn out, until his feet were badly blistered, he was lying down, feigning sickness. The guard has become a little careless. Just about sundown, heavy thunder set in the west. The clouds continued to increase, the elements grew very dark. In the meantime, they had put out a chain guard all around the encampment and said guard was about 30 steps from guardhouse. The lowlands were all bottom, covered with heavy timber, and a large oak had fallen across the creek and reached from bank to bank, and the bark had all slipped off. About 30 feet from the top of the tree, the foot of a steep mountain set in. The guard fire was about 60 yards south of the guardhouse. The clouds soon came up, and a heavy rain set in with terrific thunder and lightning, and as the army had temporary tents, the guards all crawled in under the tents and left the author by the fire. The rain soon quenched the fire. The chain guard were walking up and down the dry creek, and they met at the log referred to. The author thought now was his time to make his escape, if ever. Knowing that he would have to have a shoe, slipped to one of the tents, got hold of a shoe, and then the thought struck him that he would like to have a revolver, but on further examination found their revolvers to be placed in such a position that it was impossible to get one without waking the men. He then slipped to the butt of the log and heard the guard meet at the log and turn again on their beat. He at once crossed on the log on the other side, walked into the brush, reached the foot of the mountain about 20 steps distant, and halted. Everything appeared to be quiet. The release around the guard fire was singing, whooping, and hollowing. The author then took the mountain, which was about 1/4 of a mile high, and it always has appeared to the author that he crossed the log and went up the mountain as light as a cat. On reaching the top, still raining heavily, the thought came into his mind that I am once more a free man, but I am in an enemy's country without friends, and at once determined in my mind to reach Springfield, Missouri, if possible. I sat down, pulled on the shoe that I had taken, and it just fitted without a sock. I then procured a dead stick for the purpose of holding before me as I traveled, for fear I'd walk off of some steep cliff or bluff, as it was very mountainous. Having the guard fire for a criterion, I moved northwest, soon struck the leading road west that the army was marching on, traveled the road for about 1 mile, came on to the pickets, surrounded the pickets, struck the road again, traveled all night until just gray day, directly west or nearly so. A slow rain continued all night. As soon as it became light enough to see, I found myself in a country completely covered with pine timber. I turned square from the road, went about 350 yards up to the top of a high knob, found about 1/4 of an acre level bench. A large pine had turned out by the roots, and the hole was partially filled with old leaves. The author always had been afraid of a snake, but the time had come when he had more fear of a man than a snake. So he rolled himself down into the hole in the leaves, and at the time had become chilled with the steady rain. About 9 or 10 o'clock, as well as the author could guess, he heard the beat of the drum, which told that the army was marching on the same road that he had traveled in the night. In a short time, the army passed where the author was lying in the sink. The author could have raised himself up and have seen the procession pass, but he had seen them just as often as he wanted to, and he remained still. Late in the evening, a company of about 65 men passed. The author was informed afterwards that they had been detailed to make search for the prisoner, with orders, if they found him, to shoot him at once. The author was further informed by Confederates who belonged to the command that as soon next morning as it was reported that the author had made his escape, that the chain guard declared that no man could have passed between them, and they were satisfied that the author was still inside of the lines. They at once made a large detail and commenced searching. There were quite a large number of box elders with very heavy, bushy tops. They said every single tree, every drift and possible place of hiding was examined. Orders were at once issued by the commander, who sent word back to the home of the author that he had made his escape and to watch for him, and as soon as he came in home, to arrest him and either shoot him or hang him at once. In the afternoon of the same day it cleared off, and just as soon as dark came, the author was determined to try to reach Springfield, being in a strange country, and knowing that if he was recaptured it would be certain death. He knew somewhere about the distance he had traveled west. He located the North Star, which he used as his pilot or guide, and set out for Springfield, having no arms of any kind, not even a pocket knife, and had become very hungry. He came to a slippery elm tree, took a rock, knocked off some of the bark, ate it, and proceeded on his journey, traveling all night. When gray day appeared again, he went to a hickory grub, broke the grub off with a rock, cut the top off with a sharp-edged rock to be used for a weapon, placed himself in hiding, and remained all day. As soon as night came, again he proceeded on his journey, traveled no roads except when they run in direction of the North Star. On the second morning he went into a small cave surrounded by a thicket. About 10 o'clock in the day he found that he was near enough to some rebel command to hear the drilling. As soon as dark came on, he proceeded on his journey. The nights were dark and only starlight until the after part of the night. He went near a spring house, but when he got to it there wasn't a drop of milk in it. He passed through an Irish potato patch, grabbed 2 or 3 small Irish potatoes and ate them, passed through a wheat field, rubbed out some dry wheat in his hand, ate that, ate a few leaves off of a cabbage. On the third morning went into hiding, remained until the darkness came again, and resumed the journey. On the morning of the 4th, at daylight, I had reached an old trace, pulled out my clothes and wrung them, and put them on again, as the dew was very heavy, and every morning my clothes would be wet. I went about 30 or 40 yards from the old trace and thought to myself, if I saw any person passing that was not armed, that I would approach and learn where I was. Hadn't been there more than a half hour when I heard a wagon coming. As soon as the wagon came in sight, I saw that there was a lady driving, accompanied by a small girl and boy. I got up and moved into the road, walked on and met the wagon, spoke to the lady. She stopped the wagon, and I asked her if she would be kind enough to tell me where I was, that I had got lost, traveled all night, and didn't know where I was. She told the author that he was in Stone County, Missouri, and asked him where he was from. I told her that I was from the state of Arkansas. She wanted to know if there was much excitement there. I told her that there was, that men were enlisting and going into the Confederate service, and the people were generally excited over the prospect of war. I asked her if there was any excitement in this country. She replied that there was, that the rebels a day or 2 ago had run in on White River and killed 4 Union men and drove out about 40 head of cattle, and that's why I am going out here in this wagon. My husband belongs to the Home Guards and has come in home on a furlough and is afraid to knock around the place for fear he will be waylaid and shot by the rebels. I then asked her if she would allow me to ask her a civil question. She replied that she would. I asked her what her politics were. She told me that she was a Union woman. I told her then that I would tell her the truth, that the rebels had me prisoner, and that I had made my escape from them, and had been traveling only in the night time, that this was the 4th morning since I had made my escape, and I asked her how far it was to the house, that she was the first person I had spoken to since I had made my escape. She said it was about 350 yards around the point, to go on down to the house, and as soon as she got some light wood she would be back. I went to the house, hallooed at the fence. A man came to the door and invited me in. I walked in, and at once I began to look for arms, and to my great delight I saw a Springfield musket lying in the gun rack, with a cartridge box with the letters U.S. on it. Oh, the thrill of joy that passed through my mind! I had often heard the old adage quoted that a friend in need is a friend indeed, but had never before realized its full meaning. In a short time the lady returned. She went to work cooking, soon had me something to eat, but I had almost lost my appetite, having fasted so long. After I ate something, and while she was preparing provisions to carry with me, the man told me there was but one place that we could cross White River without being placed in great danger of being captured by the rebels, for they were patrolling up and down the river every day. I told him I never had attempted to travel afoot in daylight since I had made my escape. He told me he thought if we could get safely across the river, he knew of an old trace that led across the mountains and intersected Taney County, and as soon as we reached that settlement, they all belonged to home guards, and the man would be in no danger in making himself known. The woman baked enough biscuit and tied up bacon and red onions with them. The author thought to have lasted the hungry man 3 days for him to carry with him, and we at once, after taking leave of the good woman, followed by her best wishes that I would get through to the Federal lines safely, started for White River, about 2 miles distant. Just before reaching the river, he left the author standing in the road, went into the house nearby, and soon came out with 2 other men in company with him. On reaching the river, where there was a canoe tied to the bank, they stepped aside by themselves, held a short consultation, then all got into the canoe, carried me across the river, piloted me across the river bottom to where the old trace left the bottom. There we separated, they hoping that I would get through to the Federal lines safely. They didn't think there was any danger in traveling in daylight because there wasn't a single settlement for the entire distance of 25 miles. The author traveled on until dark had overtaken him. The moon gave no light until the after part of the night. The author lay down by the side of the road, took a nap. After the moon came up, proceeded on his journey, and in about 2 miles came to a house. Hallooing at the gate, a lady came to the door and said, "Come in." They appeared to have a very savage dog. I remarked to the lady that I believed the dog would bite me, and noticed at the same time that she stood off to one side of the door. She remarked, "Go in, that dog will not bite you." As I stepped into the door, I was confronted by a man standing in the middle of the floor in his nightclothes with his old Springfield musket cocked and presented, and he called out, "Halt!" The author halted, of course, and the next remark was, "Who are you, and where is the balance of your crowd?" The author replied, "There is no balance of them, and there is not much of myself left. The Confederates have had me prisoner, and I have made my escape from them, and I am now trying to reach Springfield, Missouri." The man ordered his wife to strike a light, and after viewing the author critically, placed his Springfield musket near the bed and invited the author to take a seat while he dressed himself. Being not more than 2 hours until daylight, his wife asked me to go to bed and rest. I told her that I wasn't fit to lie in bed, that I had lain on the ground like a hog ever since I had been arrested. She said that it didn't matter how dirty a Union man was, he was welcome to sleep in her bed and to lie down, and she would proceed at once to get breakfast. That there was some refugee wagons, about 2 miles distant, making their way to Springfield, and that she would have me up in time to reach them. Accordingly, after eating breakfast before daylight and starting with the purpose to reach the wagons before they broke camp, the man remarked to the author, "My captain lives just this side of where the wagons are camped, and I know he would love to see you and learn about the movements of the rebels." When we got to the house, he hallooed, and the captain came out, asked the author his name, where he lived, and when he was taken prisoner. The author gave him his name and place of residence, and on learning that he was from Howe County, asked him if he was acquainted with a man by the name of Washington Galloway. The author informed him that he was well acquainted with him. He inquired as to which side he was on, the Confederate or Union. The author informed him that he was on the rebel side, and was a captain commanding one of the rebel companies, that I saw him and had had a conversation with him on the evening before I made my escape. He said he is an own brother of mine. My name is Jesse Galloway, and the tears ran from his eyes like a whipped child. He said, "Get down, you are not in a condition to travel any further at the present time." He gave me a change of clothing and had my clothes washed and sent me through to Springfield by one of his men on horseback. About 3 weeks after I left him, the rebels slipped up near his house, lay in ambush, and when he came out into the yard, they shot him to death while he was holding an innocent child in his arms.